Hey, and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Sam.
I'm Billi.
Earlier this week, Australian authorities seized 2.34 tonnes of cocaine from a fishing boat off Queensland's coast in what was the largest cocaine seizure in Australian history. Police told us that the haul has a street value of about $760 million. Following the operation, called Operation Tyrandor, police charged 13 people, including 2 under-18s and 1 in a leadership position of an outlaw bikie club, with conspiring to import drugs. If found guilty, they're going to face a maximum sentence of life in prison. In today's podcast, we're going to chat to AFP Commander Stephen Jay, who led that operation.
Sam, before we get into your interview with Commander Stephen Jay, do you want to first just give us a sense of the state of cocaine use in Australia at the moment? And not only how many Australians are consuming cocaine, but also it just feels like there have been quite a few major police operations in the last 12 months when it comes to cocaine.
It definitely feels like we've used the phrase record haul quite a few times. And whether that's talking about international cocaine seizures or domestic cocaine seizures, there's definitely been a trend. And I asked the commander about this trend.
It seems clear that there's a real worldwide crackdown on cocaine use.
Yeah, and interestingly, when I was doing the research for the interview, there's also an increase in supply of cocaine. So there's more cocaine being made out of, cocaine hotspots like South and Central America. So it's a higher volume game now. The seizures are going to be higher. The amounts on the streets are going to be higher as well. And according to government data updated in February of this year, 4.5% of Australians over 14, so we're talking here about 1 million Australians, have consumed cocaine in the last 12 months.
Interesting that that's over 14. That's so young.
Yeah, well, that's kind of, I think, when they start really diving into the research about population trends with drug use. So that starts there. And that's up from about 1.3% of the population in 2001.
Wow.
So it's kind of 4x'd itself almost in 25 years. The average age of first use of cocaine in Australia is now 24, and that's risen a little bit from 23 and a half a couple of years ago. And of those who have used cocaine in the past year, about 15% of that group are using it monthly or more often than monthly. Interestingly, 1 in 4 users of cocaine within the last 12 months said they'd been diagnosed or treated for a mental health condition as well.
Interesting. What else do we know about the population of Australians who use coke?
So it's a more common drug used by men rather than by women, but the percentage of women who use it is growing rapidly, and that gap is narrowing. If you live in a wealthy metropolitan area, you're 4 times more likely to have had cocaine within the last 12 months than somebody in areas of socioeconomic disadvantage. There's also a marked increase over the last 20 years in cocaine consumption in the LGBTQIA+ community, with consumption rates about 2.7 times higher in that sector compared to the heterosexual population. If we zoom out and look at all drugs, it's now the second most common drug consumed by Australians behind marijuana.
And so you said earlier that Australian authorities had seized 2.34 tonnes of cocaine.
Yeah.
I find it hard to conceptualize or contextualize how much that actually is.
Yeah. So it's 2,324,000 1-gram bags of cocaine. That is an insane amount of cocaine. It's the same weight as a car. I found that helpful to kind of visualize this seize. And when you look at how much cocaine Australians consume in a year, it's about 4 tonnes, according to federal authorities. So when you consider the 2.34 tonne seizure, that's over half of the entire national annual consumption of cocaine in one seizure. It's more than New South Wales alone, and New South Wales alone is responsible for 55% of Australia's cocaine use. So that is a massive dent into the supply of this drug coming into Australia.
And what can you tell me about the price? How does a seizure like this impact the price of cocaine on the street?
It's a really tricky question to answer and to draw a link between that. And I've asked the commander to kind of explain this point a bit more as well. But to give you a sense of the numbers here, in 2009, 2010, a gram of cocaine, a bag of cocaine, cost about $40 to $70 in Australia. Now it sits somewhere between $250 to $400, and we pay the highest for a gram of cocaine out of any country in the world. And I think the other interesting element here, though, alongside price, is what's actually in that bag of cocaine. And the federal criminal authorities say that they've seen a decrease in the purity of cocaine since about 2018. So on the graph, there's an interesting increase in the purity of cocaine in kind of 2005 to 2018. Now it's dipping. And some data that's emerged from the ACT's pill testing in recent years shows that as much as 40% of cocaine in Australia is not actually cocaine. And that was also something I wanted to talk to the commander about, which is this idea of if we're removing cocaine from the streets, but we know that consumption doesn't change, then what are people actually consuming?
Such a great point. Let's get to that chat.
Commander Stephen Jay, thank you so much for joining us on the Daily Aus this morning.
My pleasure, Sam.
Can you give me a rundown of this week's seizure and why it was so significant to the AFP?
Yeah, okay. Well, as mentioned, the investigation, Operation Tirrandor, was a joint investigation involving the Australian Federal Police, the Queensland Police Service, the Australian Border Force, which commenced last month as a result of information suggesting that the syndicate was planning to import multi-ton importation of cocaine into Australia through the coast of Queensland. So the investigation progressed very, very quickly, leading to what occurred on Saturday afternoon, which was the seizure of 2.34 tonnes of cocaine on a small boat off the coast of Lawry in Queensland, and the arrest of 13 persons, including 2 juveniles. To our understanding, the 2.34 tonnes is the largest ever seizure of cocaine in our country, and obviously is quite significant in that respect. We will allege 2 of the individuals who were arrested senior members of the Comancheros outlaw motorcycle gang. So this arrest and the seizure will have a significant impact, we believe, in not just the drug market in Australia, but also the organised crime framework in this country.
Were the federal police surprised with the quantity of drugs on board that ship?
Hey, I'm Nish. I'm TDA's lead developer, and I'm just going to play you some elevator music so you can hit subscribe. Enjoy. Hopefully that's enough time for you to go subscribe.
Look, we were very much working based on information available to us that it was a multi-ton importation. So I don't think we were necessarily surprised when we found that amount of drugs on the boat. What I would say is obviously Australia is a very attractive market for cartels and syndicates operating in South America to send drugs such as cocaine into Australia. So there is unfortunately a large appetite for these drugs. So large seizures like this are very unusual, but they're probably reflective of the issues we have with drug consumption in this country, and particularly the appetite amongst some people to buy these drugs.
One thing I noticed as I was reading about this operation is that it began in November. I mean, by, a look at a calendar, that could be potentially only a week ago or a couple of weeks ago. Was that unusual for an operation that resulted in such a sizable seizure? And why did things kind of come to you so quickly and then eventuate to its conclusion so quickly?
Yeah, that's a good point, Sam. So, yes, for us, the investigation only commenced a month ago. So, yes, it is unusual and quick. What I would say, however, is that the individuals, the entities involved in this kind of offending, or alleged offending, you don't just stumble into this. It's something that you have to make yourself available for. So police forces and agencies around the country are very well versed in identifying people who may be involved in this type of activity. So although the investigation only ran for a month, the reality is, intelligence and information we had available to us was suggestive that something was occurring. The other point you make, which is a good one, is that this is a significant undertaking. So we may have only been physically investigating it for a month. But the reality is that an activity like this, planning for a syndicate to import this quantity of drugs in Australia, may have taken 12 to 18 months. So we have come in late, but a syndicate or a group of individuals looking to do what these people have allegedly tried to do, this would have been a significant enterprise that may have taken a very long time for them to pull together. So I think it's fair to say we came at the tail end, but, the individuals who have been arrested were known to us.
And that's something I picked up in our comment section when we've been reporting this story is the sheer, we're talking about the weight of a motor vehicle worth of cocaine coming in. I mean, that is a complex operation if you're moving a ton of bricks or a ton of wood rather than a ton of illicit drugs.
That's a very good point. And I think that it also goes to an issue which we've mentioned is not only do drugs like this have a potentially catastrophic impact on the Australian community, what this syndicate proposed to do is highly risky. So it's risky to the people who may end up consuming these drugs, but the individuals involved in this alleged offending have attempted to travel 460 kilometres off the coast of Australia to collect a large weight of drugs in what was questionable weather conditions, and have then proceeded back to the proximity of Gari where their vessel's broken down. So
exactly, and that's been the angle actually picked up by most of the international media is, the headlines are reading ship breaks down as cocaine, pickup mission goes along. Did that breakdown and the mechanical issues of the ship change the way that your team approached the mission?
No, I mean, it's fair to say they were obviously the alleged syndicate were very surprised that that their vessel broke down, and we were as well. Neither of us, we probably were on common ground in that perspective. Neither of us expected this to occur, but fortunately for us, obviously we were aware of what was going on, and we were able to interdict, and Water Police went out there and obviously arrested the alleged offenders on the boat. I think it's worth noting too that this syndicate had previously attempted to pick up from the mother vessel on another small boat, and that had broken down. So actually the syndicate had made 2 attempts to travel to the mother vessel to collect the drugs. The first vessel didn't get very far and broke down. The second one got out and got most of the way back and broke down. So again, it points to just how dangerous this type of activity is, and it's certainly not something we would recommend for anyone to attempt to do.
And you said earlier in the week in the media that mother vessel is still in the ocean, right?
Yeah, look, what I would say is obviously the source of the cocaine, including the mother vessel and location from which it's come from, is still very much an active line of inquiry to us, and obviously we're still progressing aspects of that. I can't really speak much further on that at this stage.
I'd love to turn then to, you mentioned before that this type of operation occurs and then you hope that it takes drugs off the street and especially of that volume. I was doing a bit of research before this and, that's the entire volume of the consumption of everyone in New South Wales for a year.
Yeah.
So it's a sizable amount of cocaine. How do you guys then measure the effectiveness and the quantifiable results of an operation like that in the, say, 12 months to come?
I mean, that's a good question, and to be frank, there's not necessarily a lot of science around it. What we do know for a fact is that it will have a significant impact. There's a lot of people who've invested, well, we would presume quite rightly have invested a lot of money, who are now out of pocket. So not only is there a big hole in Australia's cocaine market or anticipated cocaine market, which will need to be filled, there'll be a lot of people in the criminal networks who have lost a lot of money. So that will have repercussions across the wider network. What we do say is obviously we recognise there is a significant market for illicit drugs in this country. We would hope that this would provide opportunity for those who are impacted by drugs to reconsider and to seek help. We're aware that 3 people are hospitalised every day just with cocaine-related overdoses or injuries. There is a perception about cocaine, but cocaine is a serious drug that causes significant health issues, and hopefully this will have an impact and lead people who may be habitual users to seek medical help and find a way to deal with that.
And the other thing it might do, of course, is naturally if there's less supply in the market, but increased or sustained demand, the price of cocaine could increase in Australia. Do you hope that there's kind of a tipping point, that there's a price that Australians are not willing to pay for cocaine?
That's a really good point. I think what we understand is that Australian cocaine users pay amongst the highest price in the world for cocaine. So Australian users are paying a lot of money. I would hope absolutely that an impact of a seizure of this size, as you said, such a massive seizure will drive the cost of cocaine prohibitively high. Maybe that will be an incentive for others to move away from using a drug which is by its very nature extremely harmful. And the other part I would say about drugs is not just the health issues on users, but the whole microcosm or ecosystem of crime and criminality that goes around drug use, drug sale, drug distribution across the country. So it's not just the impact on the user, it's the ecosystem of crime and organised crime that sustains it, supports it and profits off it. And ultimately that's what police and law enforcement agencies are about dealing with.
Stephen, I've just got 2 more questions for you, and they relate particularly to questions I think I know our audience of young Aussies are thinking. So if we know that there is such a substantive withdrawal of cocaine from the Australian market, but we still feel like we know people around us who are partaking in illicit drug use, how do you feel about the risk then that that's not cocaine? what more discussions do we need to be having about the fact that if the real product didn't make it on land, then and the sales of cocaine remains the same, that's actually something totally different.
I completely agree. I mean, the reality is that drugs are adulterated, and you don't know what you're using, whether it's cocaine, whether it's a methamphetamine, whether it's ecstasy or others. You actually don't know what you're consuming. And I think the removal of this seizure of cocaine, it will impact the cocaine market. There may be other drugs that take the place or purport to take the place. That's something, I guess, and it's a health issue, a public health issue as well, that drugs by their nature, illicit drugs by their very nature, are not safe to use. And you don't know what you're consuming. And ultimately, one part of it is law enforcement, the other part is health and public knowledge around the risk of taking illicit drugs and when you take something, what impact it may have on your health. So law enforcement is one part of the answer. It's not the whole answer. It can't be. It is also a public health discussion. And, with your young viewers and listeners, I guess, making informed decisions if you do use illicit drugs, what you're actually consuming, because it may not be what you actually think you are.
Do you have a view on pill testing then and cocaine testing?
Look, I don't really, to be honest. I mean, it's obviously a matter of debate across the various states and territories across the country, and these discussions are very worthwhile discussions to occur. But I personally don't have a view on it one way or the other. Obviously, my role from a policing perspective is to limit the supply of the drugs in the Australian market, and that's what we do. But ultimately, policing and law enforcement is one part of the answer. But issues like that are part of a wider discussion, I guess, around how to deal with this issue in our society.
Commander Stephen Jay, I've just got one last question. In full transparency, when I said to our team here at the Daily Aus that I was chatting to you and if there was anything that they would like to ask, there was one question that came up amongst quite a few of them, which is, what do you do with the 2.3 tonnes of cocaine now?
Yeah, it's a good question, and obviously the media report referenced the fact that on the street the cocaine may have been worth $750 million. The reality is that as it currently stands, it's worth nothing because it's in our custody. It will be destroyed. Suffice to say, a large amount of drugs like that is destroyed. Obviously, I can't explain how and where it is destroyed, but it will be safely destroyed in an environment where it won't cause any harm to the community. So that does occur. It's a significant logistical process, and given the nature of it, obviously I can't go into great details, but rest assured it will be destroyed in a safe environment.
Stephen Jay, I really appreciate your time and thank you so much for joining us this morning.
No, I appreciate it. Thanks very much for the opportunity.
Such a fascinating chat that paints a really clear picture of cocaine use in Australia and what authorities are doing to crack down on it. Thank you, Sam, and thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Daily Aus. We will be back this afternoon with your afternoon headlines. Until then, have a great day.